Guys, really glad you could all be here today. And something near and dear to my heart, I wake up in the morning thinking about how to finance yachts. And that's just what we do. You know, my wife and I, half our business totally in Spanish. My wife and our business partners, we do this 6 days, 7 days a week. We do it internationally. We travel more than any couple you could possibly name. And we meet some really nice people along the way. And the toughest thing about getting a boat is figuring out how you're going to pay for the thing. A lot of different choices that people make on it. You know, some people say, well, okay, I'm going to cash my 401k. Please don't do that. Or they'll say, you know, I'm going to take my assets out and use that to pay for it. That could be an okay idea too. Financing for a lot of people is a good way to go though, and the whole process is a little bit of a mystery sometimes. And what we really think is very helpful, sometimes these prospects, we have people that say, a year from now I'm buying a catamaran, 2 years from now I want to go cruising. It's never too early to start the conversation, because what you don't want to do is you don't want to find the boat that you love, fall in love with it, and then find out that you can't afford to keep her. And so those are some things that are very, very important. Communication is really important. We spend a lot of time talking to people and just figuring out what they're trying to do. But just to give you sort of an idea of how the whole process works, is we start out with a conversation. We usually ask about 5 questions. What kind of cat are you buying? How old is it? How much is it? And then we get into some things like, what does your credit look like? Typical credit for a guy, just to give you an idea, somebody buying what would be very, very typical, let's say a $400,000 catamaran, typical is going to be about 20–25% down. That would be about average. Financing about $300,000. For that, the average client might be making $150,000 a year. We sometimes will get folks that come up to us and say, well, you know, I make $100,000 a year and I want to buy a $450,000 catamaran. Those are some things where I kind of have to do a reality check, because you can't really qualify. You know, you got a debt income, but everybody's heard of it, you buy a house, so you can 40%. What's that? Oh, there we go. Everyone's heard of the debt to income, of course, 40%. Same thing with boats. But boats, you've got a payment to income of 15%. So in other words, if you bring in $10,000 a month, they figure you can afford a $1,500 a month payment. So those are all some of the things that we work through. Every single situation is very, very different. And our whole job is to help you guys say, okay, if you're there today, great. If you're not there today, what do you have to do to get there? What makes sense for you? Yeah, you want a $450,000 catamaran. If you can afford a $250,000 catamaran, maybe that helps. Maybe it just takes some more time to do it. But it's a moving target. It's all communication. We have a great time. We've got a lot of good friends all over that we've made, and just look forward to making some more. And so I'll shift over now on this part of it, and then we'll start in some questions as well.
Hi, good morning. My name is Jonathan Sands, and like they said before, Thomas said, I'm with Cat Marine Surveyors. And I've been surveying for about 13 years. And when I first started, we did kind of just like every other surveyor, you know, whatever boat, you know, came across my desk. And then starting around 2010, I got more actively involved with just catamarans, or not, well, just catamarans and just catamarans as the, you know, as the primary focus of the boat. It's worked out well for me and for other people, because that kind of coincided with when catamarans really started to ramp up. You know, before that, particularly if you went into the Caribbean or any place, you know, catamarans were like 1 out of 10. But if anybody's gone down to like the BVI or anywhere in the Caribbean, it's not 1 out of 10 anymore. And so, you know, by specializing catamarans, it's really allowed, you know, my company and my business to grow somewhat organically because of that. One of the really nice things that works for both me and for buyers that I work with or whomever is because I do specialize in catamarans. I know the boats extremely well, and it makes my job a little bit easier because I don't have to figure out, you know, where things are on the boats, at least not as much as somebody else might. And you also, from the buyer's perspective, it allows me to spend more time on the boats where, you know, where I feel it's more important and more warranted, and then I have a very good grasp on sort of what to expect on every boat and where it fits in. And that's sort of just, you know, kind of the highlights for me and my services and whatever else. But a lot of you already know the survey kind of comes down to basically once you've taken your, you know, you've narrowed down the scope of boats, hopefully to 1 boat, maybe 2. You know, and so you've sort of already gone through, you know, which models you like and which galleys are best, and I focus on determining and evaluating the condition of the boat. And I wouldn't say people overlook it, the condition of the boat, but I would say, the condition in having it, understanding the condition is probably one of the most important parts of the boat. For most people are looking at, one of three major manufacturers. You could broaden that out to 5 to 10 if you open up the value out there. But they're looking at it, and I would venture to say probably, especially the 3, and even if you stretch it out to the 10, almost every boat can do everything that they want to do. And so I kind of encourage people to just kind of go with whatever boat, that they like and works for them. But where the condition plays into it is, I just think, that's just what I do. I'm biased. I'm a condition person. But you can probably have a boat that you absolutely hate, that's in really phenomenal condition, and you'll have, one experience. And then you can have a boat where you absolutely love the boat on a brochure, and it's a fantastic boat, but every day something breaks on it, and you probably will have a much different experience in the boat. And so I just, I kind of encourage people to take that into consideration and just understand, how the condition of the boat is going to play into to sort of their time on the water, boat ownership, and things like that. And that's not to say that you have to buy a perfect boat or get the boat perfect, because, again, I've been doing this 13 years, and, I can count on one hand how many boats that I've done that are perfect, and it's this many, But it is important to understand the condition of it and find a boat that the condition is something that you're okay with. Everybody has strengths and weaknesses. Some people are tinkerers and don't have a lot of extra money, so they can go find a boat that, that just, changing and rebuilding water pumps, all the time is not an issue. And then other people are not tinkerers in a boat that, necessarily, they can just write a check for new engines, and that works out really well for you too. And I think it's just important to, again, understanding the condition of the boat and how it's going to affect the term of ownership and the usability of it. And in a few minutes, or whenever we get wrapped up, I'll pass out it's a one-piece of paper. It does have my contact information on it, but it also kind of has some just really broad strokes of things to pay attention to, even before you call a surveyor. We're going to go through everything on the boat, and we're going to be able to give you hopefully a very detailed list of what the boats need and don't need. But there's definitely some big things that you guys can look at, while you're shopping for a boat or before you call a surveyor. And actually, if you go through the list fairly not carefully on board the boat, but realistically, there really shouldn't be very many surprises come survey day. There can be, but that's, I like it when we finish the survey, good, bad, or whatever it is, and the buyers are like, yeah, okay, that's what we expected. What I don't like is when, we finish the survey and they're like, geez, this is way more than what we thought. That means there was a problem somewhere before we got on board the boat. And I'll pass that out in a minute, and then if you guys have any questions on that, and I'll be around after as well.
It's probably worth mentioning the link between finance and surveys also, because if you're ever financing a boat, you are going to need a survey, and that includes 3 different elements: survey, sea trial, and haul out. That's with the surveyor. And the boat actually has to be in average condition. And after the latest hurricane episodes that we've had, we constantly get questions about, well, there was a boat that's, that somebody will say, gee, we've got a 40-foot Fontaine Peugeot for $70,000. I said, well, what hurricane was it in? And, companies will not finance a boat that was a constructive loss in a hurricane. Most insurance companies also will not insure those boats. So you got to be very careful there. That's where a good surveyor comes into play, because they will be able to see if there have been damage, this unreported damage, for example, down in some of the Caribbean.
Yeah, on my little piece of paper, when you're looking at the condition of a boat and what's acceptable, again, sort of what your skill set comes into play, but also it's actually kind of the two things on there, and they relate to this, is just beware of project boats. Project boats often became project boats through years and years of deferred maintenance, although there are a lot of single event type things that have occurred recently with the hurricanes. But just they tend to be more work than what people expect them to be. I don't think I've ever had anybody come through with the project boat and said, yeah, this was super easy. We fixed it up. More often than not, you'll see that boat back on the market 2 years later, possibly in worse condition than it was, just because it became, well, it didn't become, it was too much to begin with. And then, of course, with insurance and finance, and it doesn't have to be a project boat for that, but just keep in mind that, Zack's really good, and a lot of people are pretty good at getting boats, financed and insured and what have you. Under, just black and white, that yes, they can get them, taken care of usually, but you are gonna, the insurance might be more expensive. There's gonna be some hoops to jump through and things like that. So even if you want that project boat, just be aware of it. There's other people involved that it's not always quite as simple as you think it's gonna be.
It's always kind of interesting too, because it's been kind of a trend lately, because everyone, including myself, love all the vlogs on by the sailors. And what we found this year, we've actually had a couple of folks with very limited experience on catamaran. Just kind of a show of hands. Anyone here who has really, really limited experience is thinking about buying a catamaran? Okay, yeah, quite a few. Yeah, those vlogs are great. They do that for you every time. So there's some great ways to do that, because we've actually, one question that always comes up, it comes up in the insurance and it comes up on the finance side, is what's your experience level? And if what you say is, well, I've got a couple of the ASA courses, that's not experience. It's education, but not experience that they're going to look for. These guys do a really good job at Just Catamarans, though, of helping you guys find a captain to help you bridge through that. And what you'll find is there will usually be a requirement for like 30 days of having a captain on board, time well worth spending. My brother, just personal thing, has 15,000 open ocean miles with a Tartan 3800. He bought a new Catalina 445, which broke my heart. Not one hole too few, but in his case, he had a captain on board full time for 1 week just to learn the systems. Because sailing a boat of any type is easy. Sailing a boat when you've just lost one motor 50 miles offshore is very difficult. There you've really got to know your systems. There you've got to know exactly what to do and how to do it. Otherwise you become one of these terrible stories nobody wants to hear about. So just a couple of thoughts on that.
Yeah, with a lot of the first-timer people with less experience, I would probably say, I don't have any hard numbers really for a lot of this stuff, but most of the people that we work with on a regular basis are buying, they're buying the boat, but they're also buying the lifestyle. It's very rare. We've had, people that are like longtime boat owners where they're buying a, 45-foot catamaran and they just sold a 42-foot catamaran or a 42-foot monohull. Usually when you talk to them, the last boat they had was like a Hobie Cat or like a ski boat or runabout. And
we all started with Hobies. Let's don't go there.
Yeah, and but I don't want anybody to think that when you go aboard, and particularly on a survey day, we run through everything on the boat, and so there's a lot going on. We're taking stuff apart, putting stuff back together. Unfortunately, there's little hiccups because we're doing so much. We run them at full power, so of course it's not super uncommon for them to overheat. So it can be a really stressful day, and just you look around on it and you're like, man, I'm never going to be able to do this. Well, almost everybody that out there is doing it was in that same spot. And, it's one of those things that, you can do. You just have to, put forth some effort and give it a try and go into it with an open mind. And I do agree with Zack. I think spending time either with a captain, and even if you're, pretty familiar with boats in general, I see the biggest kind of issues people have just when they're starting to take delivery of a boat is they want to leave too soon, whatever that happens to be. I think just spending time at the dock and actually, learning to use the boat in steps. Actually learn to, when you start moving the boat and sailing the boat, you're going to live on it. So you might as well try to live on it first at the dock. So that way if you don't know how to, light the stove, you can figure that out when you can still order pizza, rather than eating cold soup, on your delivery up to the Chesapeake Bay or whatever.
It does raise an important point, because it's a powerboat story, sorry, but had a guy who bought a $800,000 Viking and brought the family, and they were going to head down to Puerto Rico in it, which is where they lived. So they did the sea trial, the survey, so on and so forth, ran it around for about an hour, then loaded that boat up with food and with drinks and shoved the throttles forward to go to Puerto Rico. They made it 50 miles before they blew the heat exchanger and had to be towed back in with 2 emergency pumps on them. So don't get in a hurry. When you do get a boat, take a little bit of time, get to know the boat, test the boat out in safe conditions where you can really take some time to get to know that boat. because those first few days will really show up any kind of problems that didn't show up necessarily in a survey, and that's okay. The other thing that you run into a lot of times on the survey is valuations. That's the biggest question we get is, what's the boat worth? It's worth whatever anybody will pay for it. However, if the bank is involved in it, there's certain ways they're going to value boats. There's 3 different things they use. They use buck, they use NADA, and they use sold boats. When a surveyor is valuing a boat, they typically use those same tools plus the condition of the boat. So let's say that you're looking at a boat that is $450,000 asking price, okay? You bring that in, the values look okay. The surveyor comes back and says, well, you know, due to a few issues here, the boat in current condition is worth $400,000. So the bank is going to use that valuation. There may be times, though, where they repair those things or they negotiate the price down. There's a couple of different things that happen inside of that.
Yeah, I mean, the survey, it does. Like you said, anybody can kind of get a range of values, you know, on that $400,000 boat or 450. You know, realistically, when you go look at sold boats and you look at on the market, you actually will probably get a range from 400 to 500,000. Some of it can be kind of obvious things, like especially with catamarans, we get 3-cabin versions, 4-cabin versions, X-charter, private owner boats. Those are really easy. You know, almost anybody that doesn't even have much experience with catamarans can figure that out. How that's going to affect value. But yes, part of our job is to kind of tell you guys where it sits in that range. You know, is this, you know, like I said, they all have issues, so we can't just say, is the boat perfect? Because again, that doesn't exist. But should this be boat, you know, should it be near the $500 or 500,000 mark, or should it be, you know, closer to the $400,000 mark? And is it, you know, is it exceptionally good or bad for that year, make, and model?
Guys, we've been talking. You guys asked some questions. What have you got? Sure. Go ahead.
I'll try without a mic.
Okay.
We all know in the car world that there are Hyundais, Buicks, Cadillacs, Lexuses. Can you maybe talk about the build of the Catamaran? We don't see the outside. It's the inside of structural integrity. You know, are things going to make it out of the blue water? Are they going to crack? All those stories beyond it. I mean, you like a Cadillac, but maybe this boat's a shed. I go to the motorboat world, the Sea Ray is clearly a shed. Okay? They can dress it up all they want, it's still a shed. You have a problem.
Yeah, I think with boats, again, most people are going to look at, you know, there's 3 of the most common builders. That's going to be Lagoon, Leopard, and Fountain Peugeot. They tend to stick out the most. And then you do get to the more exotic builds, which would be like the Catamarans and stuff like that. And there's definitely other ones out there in some luxury brands. I think, you know, I would never try to encourage you to like compare, I don't know, even a brand new Leopard 45 with an Catamarans 5X. That's not a very good comparison. You know, but they're very different boats. You know, to answer your question, I find that most of the boats that are looking at that are gonna be in roughly the same price range are gonna be very similar in build quality. There's always gonna be pros and cons of each manufacturer. There's very few exceptions for boats out there that are. Yeah, so actually, sure. Yeah, a lot of it really, in my opinion, it kind of comes down to personal preference. There's only a couple, you know, make and models out there, and I'm not going to discuss them right now, but I'll be happy to meet with you afterwards, that are like noticeably bad, or that we really like, you know, when I get a call to go do that model, I'm like, all right, you know, we're going to find, there's an 80% chance that we're going to find a fairly significant issue.
You don't see many Geminis in Tahiti.
But actually, in fairness, though, you know, they produce probably more Geminis than anything else. And while I would never say that boat's like a really like your first choice build to go to Tahiti, they actually do get there. Yeah. So you know. Yeah. Well, no, they do. And so there's definitely some boats that are more apt, you know, for certain things than others. But again, out of the big 3, and we'll even kind of extend that out to the big 10. It really comes down to your biggest thing that happens on a boat, or what changes it, or which is going to be better, is how the boat's been maintained. Because a lot of the manufacturers, they all use the same equipment. You know, it's basically it's going to be a Yamaha or a Volvo. that's going to be in there. They use basically three rigging manufacturers. That's, and that's going to be Sparkcraft. That's really actually kind of the big one. Sparkcraft is the kind of the most major player in it. They're all going to use Harkin or Lumar winches. They're all going to use Jabsco and Sureflow pumps. There's very few things that actually, that are going to affect it. So I would, yeah, it's how the boat's been maintained is what's probably going to be more, a bigger deal on how the boat, performs and whether or not, it's not performs, but just what you're getting at is which boats are better. I think it's, unless you're looking at a brand new boat, but even the brand new boats, they're going to be 3-year-old boats, and guess what, three years. So it's going to depend on how you maintain the boat. But out of the bigger manufacturers, if you've never heard of them, or something that your best friend saw on a YouTube video, but nobody's ever owned them, I'd be very cautious. Doesn't mean that it's a bad boat, just I'd be very, very cautious of it. But out of the bigger manufacturers, the boats that you've heard of on a regular basis, that you've seen at a boat show for the last 10 years, there's probably very few, if any of them, have like major problems that would make you stay away from them. You're gonna like some better than others, but that's why there's so many manufacturers.
The other thing on that too is really rely on these guys with just catamarans, because they've had the opportunity to see a really wide variety of boats. They've seen, through hundreds of clients, the good, the bad, and the ugly. They know what boats clients consistently like. They know what boats clients consistently have issues with. And the good news is that they actually do a lot of the repair and upgrades on them as well. So they see that part of it too. It's a good perspective. So if you don't have a good relationship with one of these guys, find one you like, work with them, because I find them very good resources.
Just one thing to get back to that too. So you can go on owners forums. A lot of people are very very active on owners forums, both putting information and taking information out. I think it's a great spot. However, you just want to keep in mind everybody has different experiences. People that have problems tend to make a lot more noise than people out there that are that are enjoying the boat. So it's good to get stuff, and if you see a lot of people having the same issues on a certain boat, then I would, definitely, keep that in the back of their mind, and there's a good chance you will have a similar issue on that boat. But again, one of the things I want to reiterate is, when you go look at another boat, guess what? It's going to have, a different piece, but probably a very similar piece. Do you have any, like a specific question on that or not? Sure. Yeah, sure.
He's talking about the stinky end of the business.
Yeah. No, for heads, I like electric flush heads for a couple different reasons, and probably non-vacuum flush. There's kind of three major types of heads. You can have a manual head, which a lot of boats have. You can have a vacuum flush head, which you don't really see on catamarans too much. That's more of a power boat thing. And then you can have electric flush. I kind of encourage people to go with electric flush and a freshwater flush as well if you have an option for it. The main reason why, well, two things. I used to hear everybody used to say you should always have one manual head. On a catamaran, you have 4, so if one goes out, it doesn't really matter too much, or 3, or at least 2, realistically. So you can always deal with one head that's broken. The other thing on it as well, just from experience and seeing a bunch of boats, you do tend to have more problems with manual flush heads than you do with electric. There's more bits and parts and seals. And then the biggest issue you probably get with the Blackwater system on any boat is stoppages. And the electric heads tend to have they all have a macerator in it, which grinds it up into little small bits and pieces, whereas the manual flush heads are really trying to move the product, or whatever you want to call it, through the system, with manipulating it as least as possible. And so I tend to find you have more problems with manual heads than electric heads.
And I would tell you about my experience rebuilding an old Crittenden Wilcox head. The only thing I'll tell you, when you're rebuilding one of the old heads, this is off a 69 Whitby 45, when you're pressure washing it, stand back at least 15 feet before you hit the pressure washer.
Was that, you had a question?
So, my question is about financing. It seems really confusing about what the builders require, what the financials require when you're building a brand new boat.
Okay. On building a brand new boat in the financials, from our standpoint, we know pretty much who the builders are, okay? Usually, let's say that it's a foreign build, whatever the case may be, Leopard. Usually on the first 70, depends on whether they require progress payments. Banks don't like to have equity in a boat until the boat is complete. So the bank will come in and do what we call takeout financing. In other words, if the first 70% has to be covered by the buyer, then that last 30%, the bank will come in, make the final payment when the boat is ready, and most importantly, when we got bills of sale, we got a manufacturer's MSO, a manufacturer statement of origin, those type of documents. At that point, let's say that you've got a loan for 25% of the total value, you'll have your money reimbursed back to you by the bank. And so that really just depends on whether they do require progress payments or not. Not all the builders do. And also we go off of the invoice, the manufacturer's invoice as far as figuring the valuations on those. Very typical right now. All the loans are 20 years. People never keep a boat 20 years, of course. They'll pay it off in 2, 3, 4, or 5 years or sell the boat. But it's a 20-year term, which really stretches that out. There's no big advantages to going any shorter than that. Rates right at the moment are anywhere it's kind of a funny thing because we get a lot of questions like, well, gee, the Fed dropped. Why didn't boat rates drop? Boat rates don't depend on the Fed. What they depend on is the 5-year Treasury. But you look at that, the 5-year Treasury has dropped. So what happened? What happened was back in September, a lot of the banks kind of panicked because they were running high on their rates, so they dropped the rates dramatically. We had every single bank raise the rates slightly in December. But to answer directly the question, right now, a good rate for a boat is going to be on a large boat over $750,000 loan amount, it's 4.25. Smaller boats are going to be about 4.43 right now, fixed for 20 years.
With the blue or blue shirt, yeah.
Quick question for Jonathan. Surveying new boats versus second-hand boats, what are the differences?
Sure. Yeah. So on a new boat, so typically on a new boat you're going to have a warranty. So the negotiation aspect of it is sort of a moot point. The assumption is that everything is going to be fixed that we find on it. Realistically, on most boats, as an owner, you'll probably find almost everything that we find on a new boat survey at some point. The real benefit to it is that you don't have to find it. We can find it, so you can fix it while it's still at the dock and before you take ownership of it. So it just makes your life a little bit easier on it. Whereas on a used boat, you kind of do get one shot at it to figure out what's going on, and then there is, usually it's very, very rare to have a warranty on a used boat after. And so the reason for doing the survey changes a little bit. On boats that are typically under 50 feet, we don't do a lot of new boat surveys. It does happen, but it's a little rare. On boats that are over 50, we do a lot of new boat surveys, just because the systems are more complicated and there's more to find. And even if you don't do a new boat survey, what I would encourage you to do is do a survey maybe at the end of the first year before your full warranty expires. That's going to be, if you only can do one survey, that's when you do it.
And from our side of the world, we really don't see surveys on new boats ever because that's part of the whole rigging out process is being done by the dealer themselves. So we just don't see that.
And the pink shirt? I think the kind of the sweet spot, and this is going to be terrible for new boat people, but the sweet spot is 2 to 3 years because new boats do have some issues that come up with them. And while they're usually a loose hinge here or something there, whatever the case is, it does happen where something will slip through the cracks that can be a little bit bigger, and you have more. It's just a lot of the time the first couple weeks we'll be dealing with stuff. So from a condition perspective, a lot of those new boat gremlins have been worked through in the 2 years, but stuff isn't starting to break because of age.
Kind of a real typical number for depreciation is going to be about 6% per year. And I totally agree with you as far as that sweet spot of 2, 3, 4 years. from that perspective. Once you get into the older boats, maybe 10 years old, then you get into replacing systems. And whatever you save there, you're more going to make up. You're going to need new sails. You're going to need new systems. Crazy thing, though, is we've actually had a 10-year-old boat. We financed new sails on that boat, about a $20,000 set of sails. And you can also do that with electronics. So upgrades like that, keep in mind, you can sometimes add those in if it's done correctly and if it's planned for at the beginning. It's not something you want to wait to the last minute to set up.
Also, once the boat's about 10 years, and it depends on the boat and things, that's probably when it'll start to hit the bottom of where it doesn't go down in value anymore. If it stays in roughly the same condition, if there's a major change to the boat, where you bought it when it was mint and you sell it at, and now it's a piece of junk or an engine doesn't work or something, that changes that. But 10 to 12 years, boats are pretty much at where they're going to be for the foreseeable future.